I pulled into my in-laws' driveway just as the sun was dipping behind the trees. My suitcase sat on the passenger seat beside me, neatly packed with flip-flops, sunscreen, and the floral dress I had saved for the beach. I was humming to the radio, already tasting salt on the air, picturing family photos on the sand. When I rang the doorbell, my mother-in-law opened the door. Her lips curled in a polite smile that never reached her eyes. "You were never actually on the guest list," she said softly, almost like she was offering me tea. "We figured you'd be fine alone." The words hit me like a bucket of cold water. For a second, I just stood there with my suitcase handle in my hand, frozen. My heart skipped, then pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I forced my lips into a small smile, nodded as if I had just been reminded of something trivial. I even said, "Of course." On the surface, I looked calm, agreeable, almost detached. Inside, though, it felt like the floor had tilted under me. Behind her, I could see the hallway. Bags lined up by the stairs, a cooler, wide-brimmed hats, and passports sitting neatly on the console table. My sister-in-law, Sarah, and her husband, Dan, were in the living room, laughing at something on her phone. Nobody turned around. Nobody paused to greet me. My mother-in-law waited a moment, then stepped back slightly, making it clear the conversation was over. I let go of the handle, gave a short wave, and walked back to my car. No one stopped me. Not even a sorry. Not even a maybe next time. In the driver's seat, I kept my hands on the steering wheel. The air inside the car was stifling. My chest ached with something sharp and embarrassing. Not just anger, but humiliation. My nails dug into the wheel. I sat there staring at the windshield until the tears dried up before they even had a chance to fall. I had thought this trip might be different. We had been talking about it for months. Hawaii, a beach house, sunshine, family dinners. My husband had been busy with work, but I believed that maybe a week together would soften things. I pictured Sarah and me sipping cocktails on the deck, the ocean behind us, pretending we actually got along. I pictured my in-laws watching the grandkids play in the surf while I snapped photos for them. I even packed snacks to share on the plane, like some eager team player desperate for approval. But if I was honest, the signs were always there. The vague answers when I asked about the itinerary. The casual, "we'll let you know," texts. The way Sarah's name was always centered in the group chats, while mine drifted to the edges like an afterthought. Deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to believe it. It wasn't the first time either. I had been left out before. One Christmas, I was placed at the extra table in the corner, while everyone else sat around the main one, clinking glasses. During a family photo at Easter, my spot had been quietly cut out when the picture was framed for the wall. It was just the kids and grandkids, they told me, as if I wasn't raising one of those grandkids myself. At Sarah's baby shower, I spent the entire day arranging decorations, only to find my name missing from the thank you cards. The pattern was clear. I was useful when they needed extra hands, invisible when they didn't. Each slight was explained away. "We thought you were busy. We didn't want to bother you. It's better for Sarah if you skip this one." Their excuses wrapped exclusion in silk, but the sting was the same every time. This, though, was different. This wasn't a forgotten invitation or a seat at the wrong table. This was a deliberate cut. Standing on the doorstep with my suitcase in hand, while they packed for a dream vacation, and being told directly, "You're not on the guest list." I started the engine, the radio still playing some cheerful summer hit. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. I pulled out of the driveway and drove slowly back toward my apartment. The sky had turned a deep orange, shadows stretching long across the road. Every mile away from their house, I felt the humiliation harden into something else, something steadier. That night, around 10:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. A Venmo request. From my mother-in-law. $500. Your share of flights and villa. I stared at it for a long moment, then felt a strange smile tug at my mouth. I tapped the screen, sent back exactly $1, and typed in the memo line, "You'll have a surprise." The next thing I did was open my laptop. The airline's website loaded slowly, as if savoring the drama. I searched the flight number I suspected they were taking. Sure enough, seats were still available. Same time, same gate. My fingers moved quickly, almost too easily. I booked one. Not to stay with them, of course. I had no interest in cramming myself into their beach house like an unwanted guest. No, I found something better. A private villa, luxury cabana, full ocean view, separate entrance, 5 days of peace, booked under their last name. I even added a little note to the reservation. The Miller family prefers early check-in and a bottle of champagne. As the confirmation email hit my inbox, I leaned back in my chair and let out a laugh that was half relief, half disbelief. They thought they could erase me from the trip like I was a line item on a receipt. Instead, I had just secured the best seat in the house. The next morning, I packed a smaller bag, one that would fit in the overhead bin. Hoodie, headphones, sunglasses. I wanted to move like a shadow. At the airport, I parked in long-term parking, walked through the terminal with my hood up, and kept my eyes on the departure board. I didn't need them to see me. Not yet. When the gate opened, I wheeled my bag forward like any other traveler. A family of 4 lined up ahead of me. Behind me, a couple in matching t-shirts argued over a neck pillow. And just a few feet away, my in-laws were clustered together, chatting, oblivious. Sarah was already snapping selfies, tilting her head just so. My mother-in-law adjusted her sun hat. Dan carried 2 carry-ons like a mule. None of them noticed me. I boarded without a word, slipped into my seat, and stared out the window. The plane hummed to life, and the ground began to fall away. 2 days later, they screamed when they saw me in Hawaii. And I don't know if my mother-in-law realized in that moment that she had just lost the last piece of control she thought she had over me. The first morning in Hawaii, I woke up to the sound of waves instead of alarm clocks. The curtains in my villa were sheer white, billowing slightly in the ocean breeze. For a moment, lying in the oversized bed with crisp sheets and sunlight on my skin, I almost forgot why I was here. Almost. I made coffee in the small kitchen, the kind that tasted better just because I wasn't sharing it with anyone who rolled their eyes at me. On the balcony, the view stretched wide. Turquoise water, palm trees swaying, a horizon that promised peace. I sipped slowly and let the bitterness coat my tongue. Then my phone buzzed. A family photo had popped up on Sarah's social media. There they were, on the beach in matching outfits. White linen, coordinated smiles. The caption read, "Family trip of a lifetime." No tag for me, of course. I zoomed in on my husband's expression. He was standing at the edge of the group, smile thin, eyes darting somewhere off camera. I should have felt hurt, but what I felt instead was something closer to clarity. They had erased me publicly, again. But this time, I wasn't hiding at home, crying into a pillow. I was right there on the same island, sipping coffee with an ocean view they couldn't touch. By noon, I decided to take a walk down the beach. The sand was hot under my feet, the kind that made you dance quickly until you reached the cool shoreline. Families built sandcastles. Kids screamed with joy. Couples posed with rented surfboards. And then, just a little further down, I spotted them. My in-laws had staked out a spot with umbrellas and oversized towels. Sarah was arranging snacks, while Dan tried to set up a tripod for more photos. My mother-in-law sat in a beach chair, wide sunglasses covering half her face, pretending to read a magazine. My father-in-law was half buried in the sand, courtesy of the grandkids. I slowed my steps, tugged my hat lower, and kept walking. They didn't notice me. Not yet. But I noticed them. Every little detail. How Sarah looked over her shoulder every few minutes to check the tripod angle. How my mother-in-law kept pulling her cover up tighter, scanning the beach like she was guarding something. I found a lounge chair 100 feet away, ordered a cold drink from the beach bar, and watched. Not with longing, but with a strange sort of amusement. They thought they had carved me out of this trip like trimming fat from a steak. And yet here I was, tan lines forming, drink in hand, invisible, but present. That night, I treated myself to dinner at the villa. Fresh fish, grilled pineapple, a glass of wine that cost more than I'd usually allow. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. My phone buzzed again. Another notification, this time from my bank. A charge had gone through from the beach house they rented. Spa services. A couple's massage booked under the Miller family. I smiled, remembering the note I had added to my villa reservation. Early check-in, champagne, special requests. It seemed my little twist was working its way into their stay. 2 days later, it happened. I was at the resort pool, stretched out with a book, when I heard the commotion. At first it was just raised voices, then a familiar shout. My father-in-law's Prasatan. I tilted my sunglasses down and glanced across the pool deck. There they were, standing at the front desk of the resort, gesturing wildly. Apparently, the staff had mixed up the reservations. The champagne I ordered under their name had been delivered to the wrong villa, my villa. Their keycards didn't work properly. Their dinner reservation had been shifted because the Millers already had a table. And who were the Millers? Well, according to the system, me. I sat there watching them unravel. Sarah's face flushed red. Dan kept pointing at his phone, showing the booking email. My mother-in-law, usually composed, was snapping her fingers at the staff like they were children. And the staff, polite but firm, insisted that everything was booked under the Miller name and already checked in. That was when Sarah turned her head. Her eyes swept the pool, landed on me for just a second, and froze. She whispered something to my mother-in-law, who stiffened immediately. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. I just lifted my glass slightly, like a silent toast, then went back to my book. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. My mother-in-law's jaw tightened. She grabbed her bag and marched toward the exit. The others trailed after her, muttering. The resort staff looked confused, apologetic, but also slightly amused. Later that evening, my husband showed up at my villa. He knocked, hesitant, then stood there with his hands shoved in his pockets when I opened the door. "You're here," he said softly. "I am," I replied. "They didn't tell me," he added. His eyes were tired, his shoulders slumped. I let him in. He looked around the villa, at the champagne bottle on the table, the private balcony, the spread of fruit and snacks. "This is nicer than ours," he admitted. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just poured him a glass of wine and handed it over. We sat on the balcony in silence, listening to the waves. He finally said, "They're furious." I know," I answered. "They don't understand how you—" He stopped. "How I what?" I asked. "How you always manage to land on your feet," he said. I let the words sink in. For once, he wasn't defending them. For once, he saw me. As the night wore on, he told me bits and pieces. How my mother-in-law insisted the trip was meant to heal Sarah. How they rationalized excluding me as removing tension. How they never expected me to show up. I listened quietly, sipping my wine. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I simply let the waves fill the silence. Because here's the truth. They thought they had written me out of the story. But I had written myself back in, louder, brighter, undeniable. And the best part? I hadn't raised my voice once. The next morning, I woke to the sound of knocking. Not the gentle kind that comes from a friend, but sharp and insistent, as if the person on the other side owned the door. I pulled on a robe, patted across the cool tile, and opened it just a crack. My mother-in-law stood there, sunglasses perched on her head, lips pressed tight. Sarah hovered behind her, arms crossed. Dan lingered near the elevator, pretending to check his phone. "We need to talk," my mother-in-law said. I stepped aside. "Come in, then." She entered with the confidence of someone who believed every room belonged to her. Sarah followed, scanning the villa like she was cataloging every detail to report later. My mother-in-law didn't sit. She stayed standing, back straight, as if lowering herself into a chair would be a concession. "This is inappropriate," she began. "What is?" I asked. My voice was even. "This," she gestured around the villa. "Showing up here, booking under our name, creating confusion with the staff. You embarrassed us." I tilted my head. "Embarrassed you? Or showed everyone that I exist?" Her eyes narrowed. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. "You don't understand," my mother-in-law continued. "This trip was meant for Sarah. She's been through a hard time. We wanted her to have peace without distractions." The word landed heavy. Distractions. That was what I was to her. A side note. A nuisance. I let the silence stretch before answering. "Funny. I thought I was family too." Eps. For a moment, the room was filled only with the sound of waves through the balcony doors. My mother-in-law's face tightened, but she didn't respond. Sarah finally spoke. "You could have just stayed home," she muttered. "Why did you have to come?" I turned to her. "Because you didn't invite me, and yet you expected me to pay." Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't deny it. I walked to the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the kitchen island. "You asked for my share of the villa, remember? $500, even though I wasn't on the guest list. So I sent you $1 and a message. You didn't get the hint?" Sarah looked away. My mother-in-law finally sat, perching on the edge of a chair, as if the cushion might stain her. "You're twisting things," she said coldly. "We've done everything for you, and you choose to make a scene." "A scene?" I almost laughed. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't argued in public. I've been nothing but polite. If anyone made a scene, it was you at the front desk yesterday." Her lips pressed together so tightly they nearly disappeared. The truth was laid bare in the silence. They had wanted me gone. They had wanted an easier narrative, one where Sarah was the center, Dan was the dutiful husband, and my mother-in-law the benevolent matriarch. My presence complicated that story. Finally, my mother-in-law stood again. "This is not over," she said, gathering her purse. "You will regret making enemies of this family." I smiled faintly. "I thought I already was the enemy." She swept out, Sarah trailing behind her like a shadow. The door clicked shut. For a long time, I stood there, glass in hand, feeling the echo of their absence. My heart was still racing, but not from fear. It was from release. For the first time, I had spoken plainly, without softening my words to keep the peace. That afternoon, I decided to leave the villa for a while. I walked along the shoreline until I found a quiet cove. The waves here were calmer, rolling in gently, the sand cool beneath my feet. I sat down and let the water wash over my ankles. I thought about every time I had swallowed my pride before. The Christmas when I ate alone at the side table, pretending the plastic chair was comfortable. The Easter photo, where I smiled anyway, even though I knew my face would be cut from the frame. The countless times I brought dishes to family gatherings, only to have them pushed aside for Sarah's store-bought desserts. Each memory was a stone, stacked one on top of another. And now, finally, the weight had shifted. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. Not because I had escaped them, but because I had faced them and stayed standing. When I returned to the villa, my husband was waiting outside the door. He looked exhausted, his shoulders sagging, as though he had been carrying someone else's baggage for too long. "They're furious," he said without preamble. "I know," I replied. "They think you're trying to destroy the family." I met his eyes. I'm just refusing to let them destroy me." He didn't argue. For once, he just nodded. That night, we ate dinner together on the balcony. The ocean stretched out endlessly, stars beginning to prick the sky. My husband was quieter than usual, his fork pushing food around the plate. Finally, he said, "Maybe we should have done this sooner." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Drawn a line. Stopped letting them decide everything." I considered his words. It was tempting to believe that this moment marked a change, but part of me knew how deep my mother-in-law's grip ran. Still, the acknowledgement from him mattered. It was a start. Later, when I lay in bed, I thought about what my mother-in-law had said. This is not over. Maybe she was right. Maybe there would be more battles, more slights, more attempts to push me out. But the difference now was simple. I wasn't going to step aside quietly anymore. If she wanted a war of appearances, I had already proven I could play. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to beg for a seat at her table. I could create my own. As the waves crashed softly outside, I realized something that made me smile in the dark. She had tried to erase me from the guest list. Instead, she had written me into a story none of them would ever forget. The fourth day in Hawaii was heavy with heat. The air felt thick, the kind that made you sweat even in the shade. I slipped into a sundress, tied my hair back, and decided to take a walk along the resort path. I didn't know then that I was about to walk straight into the center of their storm. Near the main dining hall, a crowd had gathered. The sound of raised voices carried above the murmur of tourists. I slowed, pretending to check my phone, then realized who was at the center. My in-laws. My mother-in-law stood at the front desk, leaning forward like a general demanding surrender. Her sunglasses were off, eyes blazing. Sarah was beside her, pacing in tight circles, arms folded. Dan stood slightly behind, speaking quickly into his phone. My father-in-law was red-faced, waving a receipt in the air. Guests were watching, whispering, some even filming. I moved closer, careful not to draw attention. The smell of sunscreen and fried food mixed with the sharper tang of frustration. A clerk behind the desk kept repeating, "I'm sorry, but the reservation is under the Miller name, and it has already been checked in." That was my cue. I stepped forward slowly, the sound of my sandals slapping against the marble floor. The shift in the room was immediate. Sarah's head whipped around first. Her jaw dropped. She grabbed her mother's arm. "She's here." My mother-in-law turned. The sight of me standing there, relaxed, calm, a small smile playing on my lips, seemed to drain the words from her throat. For once, she was silent. I let the pause stretch. The tourists leaned in, curious. The staff froze, waiting. The only sound was the faint buzz of the ceiling fans. Then I spoke, my voice clear but soft. "Is there a problem with the Miller reservation?" The clerk glanced at me, then nodded eagerly. "Yes, ma'am. It seems there's been confusion. There are 2 Miller bookings. One has already checked into the private villa. That's you, correct?" I smiled. "That's correct." The silence cracked. Sarah sputtered. Dan lowered his phone. My father-in-law dropped the receipt. My mother-in-law stepped closer, her voice low but trembling with rage. "You humiliated us!" I tilted my head. "Did I? Or did you humiliate yourselves by pretending I didn't exist?" Gasps rippled through the onlookers. I didn't need to raise my voice. The setting did the work for me. The crowd, the staff, the open space where every whisper echoed. My mother-in-law clenched her fists. Sarah muttered something about disrespect. My father-in-law tried to recover, forcing a laugh, saying, "It's just a misunderstanding." But the moment was gone. They had already lost control of the narrative. I turned back to the clerk. "Thank you for clearing that up. Please make sure any future notes under the Miller name are confirmed with me." "Yes, ma'am," the clerk said, relief in his voice. And then, for the final touch, I added, "Also, please send the champagne to my villa. I'd hate for it to go to waste." The clerk smiled. Of course. I could feel eyes on me as I walked away, the crowd parting like a tide. My heart was racing, but my steps were steady. I didn't look back, not once. Back in my villa, I set the champagne on the table and poured myself a glass. The bubbles fizzed, catching the light. I raised the glass in a silent toast. Not to victory, not to revenge, but to finally standing tall without flinching. Later that evening, my husband came by again. His expression was conflicted, a mixture of admiration and unease. He sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. "They're furious," he said again. "I'm sure," I replied, sipping the champagne. "They said you embarrassed them in front of strangers." I shrugged. "They embarrassed themselves by cutting me out. I just showed up." He was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, "I think you scared them." That made me laugh, a low, surprised laugh. Good. Maybe fear will do what decency never could. The truth was, I hadn't set out to scare anyone. I hadn't planned a scene. All I did was claim my place. And yet that alone had shaken them more than if I'd shouted, more than if I'd begged. As the night deepened, I sat on the balcony, the ocean dark and restless beneath the moon. My husband had left to join them at their rental, but his last glance before walking out told me he carried more doubt than loyalty. I thought about the way my mother-in-law's voice cracked, the way Sarah's eyes widened, the way strangers had turned their phones to capture the moment. For years, I had been the invisible one, the extra seat, the forgotten name. And in one afternoon, I became unforgettable. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe more confrontation. Maybe a cold war that stretched for months. But for now, I had something I had been denied for years. Dignity. And that, I realized, was worth more than any villa or any toast. The day after the lobby incident, the resort seemed to buzz differently. People glanced at me when I walked past. A couple at the pool gave me a small nod like they had watched a performance and approved of the finale. Even the staff seemed warmer, greeting me by name, offering extra towels without asking. I carried myself the same as always, but inside I felt the shift. It wasn't about ego, it was about reclaiming space that had been stolen again and again. By afternoon, I decided to venture into town. The narrow streets smelled of grilled meat and sunscreen. Souvenir shops spilled over with bright sarongs and cheap trinkets. I wandered until I found a cafe with a shaded patio. I ordered iced coffee and a slice of coconut cake. Halfway through, I heard my name. It was my husband. He slid into the chair across from me, shoulders slumped, sunglasses hiding his eyes. He didn't even order anything, just rested his hands on the table. "They're unraveling," he said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "And?" "They want me to convince you to leave the villa, to stop making them look bad." I let the words hang in the air. The absurdity was almost funny. "So let me get this straight. They excluded me from the trip. They told me I wasn't on the guest list. They charged me for a share I never agreed to. And now that I exist, they want me to vanish again?" He rubbed his temples. "You know how they are." "Yes," I said. "That's the problem. I know exactly how they are." For years, I had bent myself into silence, into patience, into invisible corners. This time, I wasn't moving. I leaned back in my chair, sipping slowly. "Tell them this. If they want peace, they'll have to sit at the table with me. Not without me. Not around me. With me." He looked at me for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. That evening, I made my move. I called the front desk and arranged a dinner. A large table on the terrace, overlooking the ocean. I ordered a set menu, wine pairings, the works, all under the Miller name. When the reservation was confirmed, I texted my husband. "Bring them." At 7 sharp, I was already seated. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the air warm but softened by the sea breeze. Candles flickered on the long table. One by one, they arrived. Sarah first, lips tight. Dan trailing behind. My father-in-law stiff as a soldier. And finally, my mother-in-law, her posture a weapon in itself. My husband walked last, glancing between us like a referee before a fight. They hesitated at the sight of me. I gestured calmly. "Please, sit." For a moment, no one moved. Then Sarah sank into a chair, followed by Dan. My father-in-law muttered something under his breath and sat heavily. My mother-in-law lowered herself slowly, as if the chair might bite. My husband sat beside me. The waiter poured wine. Plates appeared, steaming and fragrant. The silence was suffocating. Forks scraped, glasses clinked, but no one spoke. Finally, I broke it. "I booked this dinner under the Miller name, because I am a Miller too, whether you like it or not." My mother-in-law's glass froze halfway to her lips. She set it down carefully. "You think this proves something?" "Yes," I said simply. "It proves that erasing me doesn't work anymore. I'm done being the ghost at your gatherings." Sarah scoffed. "You're making this dramatic." I leaned forward slightly. "Dramatic is cutting someone out of photos. Dramatic is seating me at the corner table. Dramatic is telling me to my face I'm not on the guest list. What I'm doing right now, that's called existing." The words landed like stones. My husband shifted beside me, but didn't interrupt. My father-in-law cleared his throat, muttering about family unity. I smiled faintly. Exactly. Unity requires acknowledgement, not erasure. The waiter brought the next course. No one touched it. The tension was thicker than the humid night air. My mother-in-law's eyes locked onto mine. "You'll regret this," she whispered. I held her gaze. "Number I regret every time I stayed silent before. Not this." The silence stretched. Then, unexpectedly, Dan spoke. "She's right," he said quietly. All eyes turned to him. He swallowed. "We've treated her unfairly. It's obvious. It's been obvious for years." Sarah shot him a look that could cut glass. But he didn't retract. The air shifted. My mother-in-law's face tightened, but she said nothing. My father-in-law busied himself with his napkin. Sarah seethed silently. I didn't push further. I didn't need to. The truth had been spoken aloud, not by me this time, but by someone within their own circle. I raised my glass. "To family," I said softly. "The whole family." Reluctantly, glasses lifted. Not all eyes met mine, but the sound of crystal clinking sealed the moment. The dinner dragged on with forced small talk, but the dynamic had changed. They could no longer pretend I wasn't there. They could no longer erase me with a shrug or a seating chart. When dessert arrived, I stood. "Thank you for coming," I said evenly. "Enjoy the rest of your trip. If free." I left before they could respond, my steps steady, the night air cool against my skin. Back in my villa, I kicked off my shoes, poured myself another glass of wine, and leaned against the balcony railing. The ocean stretched out dark and endless, waves crashing steadily against the shore. For once, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. I had written myself into the center of the story, and no one could unwrite it now. The final day of the trip arrived with skies so clear it almost felt cruel. The ocean glittered like it was mocking the chaos that had unfolded over the week. I stood on the balcony of my villa, coffee in hand, and watched a sailboat drift lazily across the horizon. For the first time in years, I felt steady, not happy exactly, but rooted. Around mid-morning, I decided to walk down to the resort's open-air market. Vendors lined the path with handmade jewelry, woven baskets, and jars of pineapple jam. I let myself wander, touching fabrics, sampling fruit, blending into the crowd. For a brief while, I wasn't the daughter-in-law on trial. I was just a woman on vacation. That illusion broke when I heard my name. I turned and saw my mother-in-law standing near a stall of carved wooden turtles. She wasn't alone. Sarah hovered beside her, arms folded, eyes sharp. My father-in-law was a few steps back, trying to look uninterested, while Dan fumbled with his phone. For a moment, no one spoke. The air between us was thick. Then my mother-in-law stepped forward. "You've made your point," she said. Her voice was low, clipped, like every word cost her. I didn't answer right away. I studied her face, the tension in her jaw, the faint line between her brows. She wasn't used to conceding ground. Finally, I said, "I didn't come here to make a point. I came here because you told me I wasn't invited, and I decided that wasn't true." Her lips pressed together. Sarah let out a sharp laugh. "Do you hear yourself? You sound ridiculous." I tilted my head. "Ridiculous is sending someone a bill for a trip you didn't include them in. Ridiculous is standing in a lobby screaming at hotel staff because you lost control of the narrative." Sarah's laugh faltered. My mother-in-law's eyes flickered. My father-in-law cleared his throat, muttered something about the weather, and drifted closer to a jewelry stall like he wished to disappear. Then my mother-in-law said something I didn't expect. "You embarrassed me." The words hung in the air. Not us. Not the family. Me. I held her gaze. "Maybe it's time you felt what I've felt all these years. Invisible. Unwelcome. Embarrassed." Her breath caught, but she didn't respond. Sarah's mouth opened, then closed. For once, there was no quick retort, no clever jab, just silence. I let it sit. Then I turned, bought a bracelet from the vendor, and walked away without another word. That evening, the resort staff delivered a farewell gift to my villa. A basket of fruit, a bottle of wine, and a handwritten note. "Thank you for choosing us, Mrs. Miller. We hope to welcome you again." I ran my fingers over the ink. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had tried to deny me the title, yet here it was, written plainly, acknowledged by strangers who owed me nothing. My husband came by later, suitcase already packed. He stood in the doorway, looking tired. "They're leaving early," he said. "Of course they are," I replied. He hesitated. "They think you ruined the trip." I raised my glass. "Number I saved mine." He didn't argue. He just sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. For the first time, I saw him not as my ally or my betrayer, but as someone trapped between two worlds, neither of which he controlled. When he finally left, I stayed on the balcony long after dark. The waves crashed steady, the air warm against my skin. I thought about everything that had happened, the humiliation at the doorstep, the dollar I sent back with a warning, the villa under their name, the moment in the lobby when strangers watched them stumble, and then the dinner, the toast, the silence that followed. It wasn't revenge exactly. It was reclamation. A reminder that I wasn't disposable, no matter how neatly they tried to write me out. The next morning, I packed my bags. The villa looked strangely bare without my things. I left the champagne cork on the counter, the note from the staff tucked into my book. At the airport, I kept my hood up and my headphones in. But when I passed their gate, I couldn't resist glancing. They were huddled together, faces drawn, voices low. My mother-in-law caught sight of me. For a heartbeat, we locked eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't glare. She just looked, as if realizing for the first time that I wasn't going anywhere. I boarded my flight, found my seat, and watched the island shrink beneath the clouds. 2 days later, back home, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother-in-law. Just 5 words. This isn't finished. Not yet. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I smiled, slipped the phone into my pocket, and poured myself a cup of coffee. Because maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't finished. But neither was I. And I don't know if she realized, in sending that message, that she had already lost the one thing she wanted most. Control.